The 666th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
Elton ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. 17 seconds left. And he was fouled. Here we go. Lawson with a runner. No. The rebound. Hansbrough at the gun. Got it.
They were 4 for 24.
Hansbrough on a switch on Paulus. A deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Tipped away by Johnson. It's loose. Page. Johnson.
And dancing in the air. The high fiver. The celebrating. They're going bananas on Franklin Street.
Pass to Britt, 15 seconds to play. Up high to Page, gets a screen from Meeks. Page driving in on the left, high off the glass for 2. 6 seconds to go. Pinson comes front court. Pinson to May for the win. Got it! Luke May! He got it! 0.3 of a second! Luke May gives Carolina the 75-73 lead. Are you kidding? Into Dixon. Boozer switches onto him. Dixon the kick. Trimble! Got it! And Carolina wins
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony back with you guys here on a Wednesday to recap Carolina's 75-66 loss at Miami. The Heels can't avoid having the Duke letdown game. They lose on the road to a good Miami team, but this was a game that in a lot of ways Carolina had many chances to win the game and quite simply failed to do so, which will lead to, I think, one of the more, disappointing podcasts that we've done so far this year. Maybe frustrating, but not the anger and the vitriol that existed after losses, let's say, to Cal and Stanford back during that West Coast swing back in early January. We'll take a look at the box score. You'll hear from head coach Hubert Davis on the loss. We do have an update on star player Caleb Wilson that we will get to as well, and so much more as we conduct our typical recap procedure. But we'll go ahead and get right into this recap. The Heels, as I mentioned, they lose 75-66 to fall to 19-5 on the year, but they now are 7-4 in ACC play. The Heels are 3-4 away from home, and they're 5-5 now in quad one games after their latest defeat. And look, when Jaron Stevenson is your leading scorer, that's probably going to spell doom for you. He led Carolina with 13 points. Wilson scored 12 on 4 of 10 shooting, but as I mentioned with the update, that meant that there was some sort of injury that was sustained. He left for an extended period of time in the second half to get his left hand taped. And then he did not play the final minute 43. We don't know if that was because of injury or for maybe he was benched like Derek Dixon, but regardless, he was not at full strength. He was not the Caleb Wilson that Carolina needed him to be to get a win on the road against a quality team. But it's deeper than that. The Heels as a team shot 27% from the field in the second half, including going 1 of 14 from 3. And they were out-rebounded once again, and they got outscored in the paint by 18. Two things we talked about so much in the preview that they had to do right to give themselves a chance to win the game. Regardless, with all of that aside, I mean, Carolina, who never led in the game, by the way. Miami led wire to wire. So that means that in the last 80 minutes of basketball, Carolina has led for exactly 0.4 seconds, 0.4 of a second, and they're 1-1. But Carolina still had many chances to take control of the game, to win the game, and they quite simply failed to do so. Their shot selection was bad for the majority of the game, and when it got down to winning time, unlike against Duke on Saturday night, they were unable to make the plays, and that's ultimately why they fall short. And look, Debbie Antonelli said as she was signing off for the broadcast, this is not a bad loss for North Carolina. Miami is one of the better surprises in the league. They needed a win like that last night to really start their NCAA tournament conversation. Many bracketologists have them either first four out or among the last four in. With that being said, though, we challenge this team to not have a letdown, to be able to be ready to play after the big emotional win against Duke on Saturday. And unfortunately, that's not the case. Losing a game that they could have won had they played much better than what they did for the majority of that second half.
Yeah, it's frustrating. It's not quite exactly what we saw on the West Coast. It wasn't really that bad defensively from Carolina, but there were lapses in this game. A guy that we didn't even talk about when we were previewing this game, Ernest Udeh Jr., has a huge game in this one. 15 points, 7 of 8 from the field, 10 rebounds. He was outstanding. Malik Reneau, below his season average, so Carolina doesn't let him score above his season average like they had that stretch that they were going through to start the season. But still, he was incredibly effective. 4 assists in the game from him. Trey Donaldson, incredibly effective as well. 14 points, 5 assists, 6 rebounds out of the guard position. So just Carolina not doing the things that they needed to do in order to win this game. We talked about the most important things that Carolina needed to do were to be able to rebound and be able to, find ways to slow this team down in the paint. And they weren't able to do either one of those. It was an incredibly successful night for Miami in both of those areas. I mean, Miami shoots 13 threes the entire game, hits just 3 of them, and Carolina still ends up losing. So it's a different recipe to get to where you were. But yeah, I mean, the reason I'm frustrated is because we said coming into this game, this was a chance to prove that you weren't going to have the letdown, that you were a team that deserves to be talked about as one of the best teams in the entire country. And you end up coming out and losing this game on the road at Miami. It's not devastating to Carolina. I don't think it means that all of a sudden now they're back on, the 5 or 6 line. We're pushing towards Carolina being on the bubble. None of that. I think Miami is a team that probably should make the NCAA tournament, especially now that they're potentially going to have True Washington healthy moving forward. That should help them as well. They look like a tournament team, but it's frustrating when you have a team like Carolina come off a win like that and they have a chance to prove something and they just can't get it done. Out executed down the stretch of the game. I think that's certainly something that you have to talk about yet again with Carolina. We've talked about some of their struggles in the last 5 minutes of games. I think you saw that again in this one where Carolina just could not get a good shot down the stretch. Their shot selection all night was pretty poor for the most part, especially when Carolina was in, shouting distance of being able to take the lead or potentially being able to take the lead. Carolina not with the most efficient possessions that they could possibly have. And so that leaves you sitting here with Carolina now 19-5, which isn't necessarily that bad. The bigger concern is that you're 7-4 in conference play. And as you try to get that double bye, I mean, you're looking at a scenario where you can, at this point with where some of these teams are at, you feel like you confidently can say you could probably lose one more game and still have a shot at it. Anything more than that, and Carolina is probably looking at playing on the second day of the NCAA or of the ACC tournament, rather. And that's certainly something that we were hoping coming into the season wouldn't necessarily be the case for Carolina. Looks much more realistic as we sit here today following this loss to the Canes.
And that's what I think is the biggest benefactor coming out of this loss, right? is getting to top 4 now. It's a lot more tougher than it would have been had you won, because, with State losing on Monday, you would have gained a game with them. You've got a game against them next week. And look, you still got to play some teams that are in front of you, i.e. State. You got to play Louisville. You got to play Clemson. And the 2 of those 3 games are going to be at home. And, of course, you got the return game to Durham. But, if I can't trust you to go on the road and win at Cal, win at Stanford, win at Miami, why should I trust you to go to an NC State and win? That's a team that's better than these 3 teams that have beaten you away from home. Why should I trust you, to go to Duke and secure a win in that environment when you're looking for a regular season sweep? And the loss did hurt their tournament stuff too. Now you have chances to make that back up because you've got some quad 1 opportunities coming up with the games against, as I mentioned, State, Louisville, Clemson, Duke, and some others. But you're now like 5-5 in quad 1, which would suggest to me if you pick up another quad 1 win, I should expect you to pick up another quad 1 loss, because you've just been proven to be very average against really good opponents. And you're going to have to be above average if you want to get back on that top 4 seed line for the NCAA tournament, which is, I think, something we were kind of hoping was starting to round into form after the win over Duke. And so, no, this is not – you didn't lose to a bad basketball team. You lost to a team that was on their home floor where they've been really, really good. You lost to a team that, in theory, that game meant more to them than it meant more to us. But that's where the maturity, that's where you rounding into some sort of a contender should show up. And it's why it's really hard to really have a lot of trust in this team as we get closer and closer to March, that they're actually going to make some noise, because what this season has shown is they haven't handled, I think, prosperity maybe as well as you would have liked to. Because I should be able to sit here and say, with wins over Duke, with wins over Kansas, and wins over Kentucky, that you're a bona fide national championship team. Like, beating those 3 programs should suggest that, especially considering what Duke and Kansas are, legitimate Final Four threats. I can't say that today. I can't say that with the confidence that I want to be able to say that with, because of some of these losses that have kind of evened out some of the success that Carolina has enjoyed so far this season. Let's take a look at the box score. I'll pull it up for you guys watching back at home. Miami shoots 47% from the field in this game. They were 29 of 62. Carolina shoots just 40%. They were 25 of 63, including, shooting 27% in the second half, 1 of 14 from 3. The 3-point percentages, as you mentioned, Miami just 3 of 13 from behind the 3-point line, 23%. Carolina was 8 for 27 for 30%. But they were, 7 of 13 in the first half from behind the 3-point line. So they shot the ball really well to start the game from deep, but could not carry that momentum over in the second half. That Miami zone caused a lot of issues for Carolina. Free throw shooting, the Heels shoot 80% from the foul line. They go 8 of 10, but the 10 attempts the fewest so far in a game this season. On the flip side, Miami goes 14 of 23. So Miami made 4 more free throws than you attempted, and they took 13 more free throws in totality. That's not been something that we've seen happen a lot so far this season. Turnovers were a problem in the first half. Carolina commits 11 turnovers for the game. That led to 10 points for Miami. On the flip side, Carolina forces just 8 turnovers, and they score 7 points off of them. Rebounding, advantage Miami, 41-35. They won the defensive glass 29-26. They won the offensive glass 12-9. Both teams were even with 9 second chance points. Bench points did go in the favor of Carolina. And had you told me that Carolina would have gotten 24 points from their bench, I would have told you that I think Carolina would have won the game and would have won the game convincingly. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Carolina plus 15 in bench points, 24-9. But they were minus 18 in points in the paint. Minus 18, 46-28. They were minus 6 in fast break points, 8-2. Minus 2 in blocks, 5-3. Minus 2 in steals, 7-5. And Carolina had 16 assists on their 25 made baskets. Miami with 15 assists on their 29 made baskets. The game was tied 3 times, but Carolina never led, as Miami led for a whopping 37 minutes and 10 seconds on the way to the win over Carolina. So that's a look at the box score, and it wasn't a pretty one, as you could expect, as Carolina falls to Miami. Let's now transition to the quotes of the game, and I got 2 quotes from Hubert Davis that I want to talk about or play for you guys. One about the game itself, and then kind of the weird interaction he had with R.L. Bynum when talking about Caleb Wilson's status after the game. The first one, though, is Hubert Davis being adamant that this was not a Duke hangover effect that played a role in the loss to Miami.
Respectfully, disagree with the hangover from yesterday. I don't believe in that, and that wasn't. But you are right. The energy effort, loose balls up in the air on the ground, Miami was getting them, and so rebounding, something that we've talk about every day, and talk specifically over the last 5 games heading into this game, that we've got to be better rebounding the basketball. And so we got out rebounded, I think, by 6. We talked about taking care of the basketball, and not just turnovers, but also shot selection. I count that as turnovers, and I think, just a small discipline and detailed plays. I think that's what you're talking about, out of sorts. That wasn't there consistently today.
I think you got to give Hubert credit. And look, a lot of Carolina fans are on him for the loss. That was pretty much the majority of my mentions. But I do think he was trying to inject some life into his team. I mean, you go back to that timeout he called in the first half where Carolina had a sequence where they just literally did not rebound the ball and gave up. I think it was either a layup or a dunk. I mean, that was, I think, as fired up as I've seen him so far this season. And as we've seen since conference play has gotten here, there has been times where this team has kind of ragged his nerves and he's gotten very frustrated and has shown that frustration. And there was some sort of a response because Carolina got down 10 and was able to, get back in and make it a 3-point game at the half. But it just felt like in the second half, he's talking about the attention to details and making those winning plays. For as well as Carolina played the final 8 minutes of the game against Duke on Saturday, you could argue and say they played as poorly last night against Miami in a game that was kind of in the same boat where it could really go either way. Who was going to take the bull by his horns? And it was Miami. With that being said, though, I think you could just tell by Carolina's lack of energy, lack of fight, lack of will. This was a team that mentally and maybe even physically, they were still on Franklin Street. I mean, Seth Trimble was a non-factor in the game, doesn't even make a field goal, goes 0 of 5 from the field, all his points coming at the foul line. Caleb Wilson was pretty much a non-factor for the majority of the game before he left with the injury, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. Henry Vassar was nowhere to be found in the second half. So I get what Hubert is saying. And, as a head coach, if he would come out and admit that he felt like it was a hangover, then he'd get buried. But I think there's really no way to kind of to step around the fact that this was a team about 48-ish hours removed or so from the big win over Duke, the emotional win over Duke. They were not where they needed to play. They were not where they needed to be emotionally to play this game, and I do think that's a big reason why they came up short last night against Miami.
Yeah, I think, and as you said, that's really tough to admit as a coach because then it really reflects poorly on you. You don't get your guys prepared. We were told that anyways multiple times on Twitter that this is just all on Hubert Davis, and that's the reason that Carolina loses is because he never gets them prepared for these types of games. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think he probably did everything that he possibly could to have them prepared for this game, but when guys just aren't in the right mindset, there's really nothing that you can do. And you could tell from the word go, Carolina was not in the right place. You knew that the offensive rebounding success from Miami was going to be there for the majority of the night. You knew that Carolina, it was going to be relying a lot on its perimeter shooting because they were settling for a lot of shots from the outside against the zone. And I think that's another thing that you just have to admit to yourself. Maybe, that would be part of his argument, was that it wasn't part of the hangover. I think Carolina is just not a good team this year when it comes to facing zone defense. I think we've seen that multiple times. Teams have zoned Carolina, and there are just certain circumstances where Carolina just isn't able to execute. We saw times where Carolina was able to have success, especially in that first half with Henry Vassar. But once that went away, Carolina really struggled to be able to find success against a team that was going zone and switching back to man throughout the night. And I think that really threw Carolina off. But it did not look like a team that was 100% locked into this game. When, as you said, when Jaren Stevenson is the guy leading you in scoring, it's pretty tough to imagine you're going to be able to win. But Caleb Wilson, from the word go, good job. Credit Miami. They did a good job of taking him out of his element. But you could tell, especially late, that he just didn't have it on this night. I think part of it was the injury, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But I think it just also was an unproductive night for him, which is going to happen. You're going to have moments like that throughout the season. This is the thing that we're worried about, though, with this team, is if you can't get big nights from Caleb Wilson, from Henry Vassar, who are the other guys that are going to step up? And on this night, the guy that, you're going to look to as that third scoring option, nowhere to be found. Just 4 points in this game, 0 of 5 from the field, 0 of 3 from beyond the arc for Seth Trimble. I think, part of it was that he was getting good looks and the shots just weren't going down. But I don't think he was nearly as aggressive as he's been at certain times this year against this Miami team and what they were doing defensively. Maybe it was just a bad matchup for him, but it just didn't feel like he was 100% locked in at certain times in this game either. But no, really nobody did. Derek Dixon, not anywhere near the night that you would expect from him. 2 points in this game, just 1 of 9 from the field. But the more concerning part was 4 assists, 4 turnovers. And that's the other thing that really clued me in that this was going to be one of those types of nights for Carolina, was the type of turnovers that they were having in the first half. Hubert loves to call them pick six turnovers, where they just turn into easy points on the other end of the floor in live ball situations. Carolina did that multiple times in the first half, where it's a turnover, it's an odd man break, there's nothing you can do, and Miami ends up finishing at the rim, gets easy points, and that's what allowed them to build the lead. So hopefully that's something that we don't have to monitor moving forward. But I think the other thing that we can just admit about this team, and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, is that this just is not a great road team for Carolina this year. And it felt like we've seen this before on the road from Carolina, where they start slow, they get behind, and then they're fighting back the entire game. That's what they did in the game against Cal. Were never able to claw their way fully back in. This one, they had multiple chances to take the lead, but just weren't able to get over that hump and actually grab the lead and grab control of this game. And a big part of it was because of how they started and put themselves behind by so much. So hopefully that's not a recipe that they're going to be following the rest of the season. That certainly was something we dealt with a lot last year and we didn't love it. Hopefully this year's team is not heading in a similar direction here as we go down the stretch with some of the road games that they still have on the remaining schedule.
Let's get to the Caleb Wilson stuff, because this right now might be just as pertinent to talk about as is the loss in and of itself. He left the game for an extended period of time in the second half. He left the floor, was back in the locker room, getting his left hand pretty taped up. It was a pretty noticeable bandage, if you will, that they put on his hand. Doug Halverson, the trainer, actually came out of the locker room before he did, and was spotted, giving some sort of a message, some sort of an update to head coach Hubert Davis. Wilson came back in and played, and actually his first possession not back on the floor. He actually hit a turnaround jump shot. So, I mean, I'm kind of sitting there thinking, well, he's about to put on a Superman cape, and we're going to add to the legacy of what's been a pretty historic freshman season. That would not go on to be the case, as Carolina would, of course, lose the game. And then Wilson did not play the final minute 43, and we don't know why. We just know that when, as the game was still in doubt, Carolina's best player was not on the floor trying to help Carolina secure a victory. And so R.L. Bynum, who does a great job covering for Carolina, tried to get some sort of an answer out of Hubert Davis about the status of the star player.
What is Caleb's situation with this left hand?
There was no situation.
I mean, he's heavily wrapped. Did that impair his ability when he came back?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, so and if you watch the video, good friend of the pod, Shelby Swanson, put out the video. Some other people that were in the press conference. Hubert's body language, not where you want it to be either, was very, I guess, like a passive aggressive,
Confrontational.
as he's answering the question, which is not what you want. It's not what you expect from Hubert. I think it does just show you the frustration that it kind of set in for him with the result in last night's game. But we found out this afternoon, I taped in a podcast with Isaac Shade for Locked On Tar Heels. You check that out tomorrow morning. But like 20 minutes before we hopped on, Shelby Swanson of the NNO reported that he had a sprained wrist. Caleb Wilson does. And since then, I've seen Inside Carolina confirm that initial report as well. And so, it could be, it could have been a lot worse. It could have been something that was broken. It's something that he can play with and he can play through. But obviously, when you look at Saturday's game and next Tuesday's game at NC State, Carolina's best player right now is not at 100%. And I think that's very troublesome. That's very worrisome for a team that really relies on him to be a 18-point per game scorer on a night-in, night-out basis, grab near double-digit rebounds, and hand out nearly 3 assists for them to play at their highest level. Not saying that he can't do that, but just saying that it's going to be a lot tougher as he has to manage playing with a sprained wrist here for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, just weird press conference. That moment was just very strange. I don't know what you really are trying to protect. I mean, I guess in that moment, it's easy. You just say, I don't know. I think it was very clear to us that whatever was going on with him at the time, and now we know it's a sprained wrist, we knew that something wasn't right. He basically did not use his left hand. And so at that point, it's pretty obvious to us that, yeah, something happened and, who knows the severity of it, but just acknowledge that he wasn't the same player after that moment. And I think that's what you saw, because really before that moment in the second half, he had started to put together something. You could see signs that he was maybe starting to get himself going just a little bit in that second half. And then he ends up having to come out of the game, and all of a sudden, we're kind of left in the dark on the broadcast. That's how it's going to be. They're not going to be able to tell you in the moment what's going on. But then he comes back, and it was very clear that there was just something off. And so now the worry is this going to be something that's going to carry over here into future games? Is he going to be limited here in these next handful of games? And you look at the games that Carolina's got coming up. Pittsburgh, that's a game that you should be able to handle regardless of how healthy he is for that game. But then you go to NC State. You got another road matchup against Syracuse. I know Syracuse isn't great, but that's still a team that, is on the road, is inside of the top 75 in the net. And Carolina hasn't played great on the road so far this season. So you can't be overly confident going into that game. And then even Louisville. Carolina's got a very difficult schedule down the stretch of the season. You look at the teams that they still have to play. They have 4 teams that they face that are inside the top 30 in the net. 2 others that are inside of the top 75. So, I mean, it's an incredibly difficult schedule down the stretch that they're going to deal with, as they always seem to do. And you'd like to have your best player at least healthy enough to be able to contribute consistently for you. And I think that's ultimately what most fans are concerned about right now, because let's just be real honest here. If he is not 100% and he's struggling, I don't know if this team is going to be able to succeed that much without him. He is the heart and soul of this team. He is the best player on this team. It's not even close. Like Henry Vassar, I think, has had moments where he's looked really good. Henry has shown you in the last handful of games here that he is a guy that is, checks the boxes of what some of the preseason concerns were with him. He is bothered by physicality, and teams can get him off of his game by being physical with him. I think that's something that now you're a little bit worried about coming down the stretch. And then the rest of the group, I mean, where's the consistency from the guards been at this, during this season? It really hasn't been there. I mean, Seth Trimble is your most consistent guy, but are you relying on Seth Trimble to really carry you during this stretch? I don't know if you can get to that point. So this is a big concern for Carolina. They have to monitor this moving forward. We will. But I mean, as of right now, I mean, you sit here, it seems like it could have certainly been worse. The sprained wrist hopefully means that he's going to be available to play. But you just wonder, is he going to be 100%? Because Carolina sure needs him to be pretty close to that.
Yeah, you do wonder, do they look at Saturday, that game's at home, Pitt's not very good. Could you maybe get by without him and try to get him ready for the game at NC State that's going to be important for a lot of different reasons? I think it's going to be interesting to see Carolina's approach. I think, he by doing what he did to try to get back on the court, he wants to play. He doesn't want to miss games because he knows he's only doing this for 1 year. But you do run the risk of an even worse injury being sustained. And as you mentioned, if this would have been much more severe, we're talking like broken hand, broken wrist, where he's pretty much done. Carolina would be able to make the tournament, but they'd probably be one and done. Maybe depending on the matchup, they could win a first round game, but there'd be really no hope for them to make the second weekend, which is what I think which is still, I think, the expectation for this team right now, with some of the wins they've gotten and with how good of a player Caleb Wilson is. So we know with Roy Williams, Carolina was always pretty cautious. I would expect them to kind of move with caution here moving forward. The difference is this team really relies on having him out there, and replacing that production would not be as easy as maybe it would have been in different years where there was a much more consistent Robin to the Batman that Caleb Wilson has been for the majority of the year. Turning our attention back to the Miami game, just want to do the stat of the game, then we'll get to more thoughts and more takeaways from this loss to the Hurricanes. I went with points in the paint. Carolina minus 18 in that category, 46-28. We talked about it going in, that Miami top 5 in the country in 2-point field goals made per game. They made 24 of them. Carolina was top 10 in the country in 2-point defense. Entering the game, they only allowed teams to shoot 44% from inside the 3-point line. That did not deter Miami from wanting to attack inside out. You mentioned they only took 13 threes. And then you really break it down in the second half. Miami made 11 shots in the second half. 9 of them were layups or dunks, including a key sequence where the game was tied at 55. And Miami's next 3 baskets were 2 were dunks and 1 was a layup. And there was one where Carolina changed defenses. They come out in a zone, and I don't know if Caleb Wilson was afraid of contact because of the injury that he sustained, but just escorts, I think it was Renault, all the way to the basket for a dunk. And then you have the sequence where Carolina didn't rebound, and they get 3 offensive rebounds in 1 possession to make a 1-possession game a 2-possession game. But nonetheless, man, it's hard to win when you're being outscored in the paint. It's hard to win when you're being outscored in the paint like Carolina was last night, being negative 18 in that category. All right, let's get to more thoughts, more takeaways from this loss. We'll get to our discussion topic, and then we'll get out of this edition of the podcast. Talk about the rotation. Because we both send out our thoughts about the game on our Twitters. And if you don't follow us on our handles. They're provided right there on the screen. HTB_Josh for me, HTB Anthony for him. And one of the things that I tweeted out was that I didn't understand the whole benching of Derek Dixon in favor of Kyan Evans. And I guess people thought that I sent a tweet out and didn't watch the game. I was aware that Derek Dixon did not shoot the ball well. I was aware that Derek Dixon turned the ball over. I was aware that Kyan Evans shot the ball really well from the field in the first half, where he scored all 8 of his points. But I did not think that he gave Carolina a better chance to win the game late. In my opinion, I thought Derek Dixon had really, he's earned the right to be on the court at winning time. You look at the plays that he made at Kentucky. Carolina doesn't win the game without him. You look at the plays he made late against Duke. Carolina doesn't win the game without him. Hubert talked about after the Duke game about how it was a great testament to your stick-to-itiveness and playing through adversity and playing for a full 40 minutes. And then in the very next game, on a night where his point guard isn't playing at a high level, you put in Kyan Evans, who in the second half did nothing. There was nothing of consequence he was doing to impact the game in a way that was a lot more positive than what Derek Dixon had done. And so, look, when you made the switch to him, you knew that this was going to be part of it. You knew there were going to be growing pains while he was growing on the job. Last night he was growing on the job, and I can't tell you that Carolina wins the game if he's on the court or not, but I'd much rather see my starting point guard on the floor at winning time as opposed to Kyan Evans, who scored more points in the first half than he had in the previous 4 or 5 games combined. And that point total was 8. So it wasn't like he put up double figures. If he had put 15, 16 up, would have probably understood that. Kyan Evans was not an offensive difference maker in the second half, which is why, in my opinion, Hubert Davis, whether they're at home, on the road, neutral court, if the game is close and the game is close late, Derek Dixon should be on the floor, barring foul trouble.
I mean, I didn't really have the biggest issue with it. I mean, he had a game where he just turned the ball over at a pretty high rate. Like, you can sway me either way. Like, I understand where you're coming from. And especially, the other argument would be, you look at the way that he has closed down games, especially big games for Carolina. He's made some important shots down the stretch for them. Kyan Evans is not. There has not been a game this season where Kyan Evans in an important spot has been able to knock down shots. So, I mean, do you really trust him in that moment to step up and be what you need offensively from beyond the arc? I guess maybe you thought with what you saw in the first half from him that he would be, but he's proven to you all season that that's not necessarily an area where he shines, is in clutch time. Derek Dixon does. And so if they would have left him in, I wouldn't have really minded it. I think Kyan Evans being in the game wasn't, like, to me, I don't think if they put Derek Dixon into the game, they end up winning the game. Like, I still believe that this team, no matter what, I mean, he didn't pull down a rebound, neither did Kyan Evans. Neither one of these guys were helping what was the biggest issue for Carolina on the night, which was that they simply could not rebound when they needed to. In important moments, they couldn't come away with those rebounds. Defensively, I don't think there really would have been that much of a difference. I mean, Trey Donaldson went to work on basically anybody that he was matched up on for the entire night. No one was really able to stay in front of him. And so I think that's a big issue no matter which point guard is in there. They were switching a lot throughout the night as well. So I don't think it really would have ultimately mattered for Carolina. The bigger issue for me, and it's going to sound weird because he had such a successful night offensively, I don't really get the Jaren Stevenson thing. I don't understand how how Hubert thinks that makes Carolina better. Because what we've seen in these first 2 halves, where Jaren Stevenson has been back in the starting lineup, is Carolina's been pretty poor defensively. And I think down the stretch, that could have been part of it as well as to why Carolina could not necessarily get important stops. Look, Jaron Stevenson, if you're playing him at the 4 or the 5, I don't think he's necessarily the worst guy to have out on the floor. It's the problem of playing him as a 3 against some of these more athletic players that he's playing against. Like when you're matched up against Shelton Henderson, man, Shelton Henderson is so much more athletic than Jaron Stevenson. It's going to be difficult for him to stay in front of him. And I think that's what you saw in this matchup. There were other times he ends up getting switched onto guards, really isn't able to stay in front of them either. And it leads to some of these breakdowns that you see on the offensive end of the floor. That's the one that I just don't really understand, is that you were having so much success with Jaden Young in the starting lineup. And is Jaden Young great? No. But at the same time, that lineup was working to start games. You were able to set the table a little bit better. You weren't getting behind like you were when you've been running this Jaron Stevenson starting lineup out there. And so I'll be interested to monitor if that ends up being switched here at some point soon, because I do think that while he had an effective night offensively, this team is still better defensively when you have other guys on the floor. And, like I said, I want to see more of Jonathan Powell. I think he should continue to play the types of minutes that he's playing. He played 20 minutes in this game. I thought he was one of Carolina's better rebounders. He had 5 in this game. I thought he was one of Carolina's better defenders. I think he does a good job on that end of the floor. And so I wouldn't be opposed to him getting back into the starting lineup for Carolina, or getting into the starting lineup for the first time this year, rather, at some point for Carolina. It's just, there were some weird things. I mean, Zayden High coming into the game as early as he did, you could say that, maybe Hubert noticed that Henry wasn't really locked in to start the game. But I don't understand. Zayden High, why is he seeing minutes before we even get to the first media timeout? That made absolutely no sense to me. So definitely a weird night for the rotations from Hubert.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't like the Jaron Stevenson move when they made it on Saturday.
Yep.
And I got why they put him in the lineup. They wanted to match Duke's size, their length, their physicality. Guess what happened? You were down 18-5.
Put Powell in the game. He's 6'6".
And you didn't grab a rebound until 9 minutes had eclipsed off the clock. You stick him out in the game last night. Guess what happens? You're down 22-12, and Hubert's having to call timeout because your team's not rebounding. Your team is not defending. There's just something intangible that Jaden Young was bringing that from a starting perspective that Carolina has missed the last 2 games. And look, Jaden Young has started, but hasn't played big minutes. I don't even think he played double-digit minutes in the games that he started. At some point, man, you just have to pick a rotation. You've got to pick a lineup, and you got to stick to it, unless injury forces you otherwise, or poor performance. And that's not what happened. Jaden Young had done nothing wrong to warrant not starting anymore. He was doing what you were asking him to do: play good defense, play with energy, and put some and create some spacing on the floor, because he's the guy that can shoot the 3 ball. If he's not doing it at the level that you want him to do it, then yes, that's where the Jonathan Powell thing really does kick in, because we have not seen the full Jonathan Powell that I thought we were going to see, because he just doesn't get enough court time. He doesn't get enough run. And he doesn't get a lot of run with the ones either. He's usually on the floor with some backups, whereas you put him on the court with Wilson or Vesar, and they're able to find him in the corner where they're getting double teamed, he's probably going to shoot 37-38% from behind the 3-point line. He can rebound. He's done a really good job of that, despite his minutes not being consistent. And he's a willing and able defender. So if you want more from that 3 spot, I understand that. Put Jonathan Powell in the lineup and put Jaron Stevenson on the bench, because you look deeper, you feel deeper, you have more athleticism and size than most teams have coming off the bench when you have him with some other guys that would no longer be starting. So I didn't like the move when it happened on Saturday. Didn't like the move last night either when he stayed in the starting lineup. And some of the lineups that Hubert was playing was him, I think, really just searching, just trying to find something to help put his team over the top. And unfortunately, that just never was able to come to fruition. Talk about the second half, and you know that's where I think for me the frustration really starts and ends, is because at halftime, you're back in the game. It's 43-40. And I mean, I just sent out a simple tweet. If you rebound and you take care of the ball, you win the game. And I believe that. And guess what? Carolina committed 8 first half turnovers, I think, only 3 in the second half. The one thing they did not do was take care, or they did not rebound. They got rebounded by 6, 3 on the offensive glass, 3 on the defensive glass. I thought Carolina's shot selection, when they were looking for the lead, was as poor as it's been in any game this season. And look, you've watched a handful of games with me over the years of us being friends, podcast hosts, no matter what it is. You know how critical I am of shot selection. But when I tell you that every shot they took when the game was tied, or they were looking to tie the game or to take the lead, I literally complained about, there was never a shot that they took that I liked. And I don't think I was exaggerating. It felt like they would take a contested 3. They felt like, I mean, there was one Caleb Wilson took where he took like a 19-foot turnaround jump shot while he was being double teamed. I mean, look, I know you can make that shot, but is that the shot that we want? Is that the best shot that we can get? And that answer was no. And I didn't understand. And it's one of those weird things when you're a basketball fan. Like, sometimes the worst thing you do is you start a game hot from 3. Because what happened? Carolina thought, well, after they missed a couple, well, we're going to get hot again and we're going to make a couple. Well, he never did. After going 7 of 13 in the first half, you go 1 for 14 in the second half. And you can't do that on the road and win. But a lot of them were contested threes, or they were just early in the shot clock threes where the ball hadn't touched the paint, the ball hadn't reversed sides, whatever it is. And I believe the ball knows when the ball should go in the basket and when it doesn't. When the ball is being rewarded with good offense, then I think the ball naturally goes in the basket. But when you take contested shots, or you don't make a defense work, and you don't make them chase and rotate and do all the things that Miami did to us, then the ball's not going to reward you. And it's dumbfounding how 48 hours later they could basically be the inverse of what they were against Duke, where when they're down 9 with 8 minutes to go, they had to play dang near perfect down the stretch to give themselves a chance. And they did that. Last night, you were never down by as many as 9 deep in the second half. It was a 2 to 4 point game, and you could never do what the game required, what the game demanded for you to take the lead. Because I felt like if Carolina gets the lead, Miami will crack. And then you get out of here with a 6 to 8 point win. But they were not able to make the plays, and that's been the theme for this team away from home. They've been in a lot of the games. You look at Stanford, you look at Cal. Cal was a big comeback, but you were there with a chance to tie or take the lead late in the game. Look at Stanford. You were up at the final media timeout. You lose both of those games, and that's something we could say about this team, is that when they leave Chapel Hill, when they leave the Dean Dome, you cannot trust them to make plays late to win games the way that we want to win and we expect to win in this conference.
Well, I think one of the things that was different about those other games was that we talked so much about Caleb Wilson not getting the ball. That wasn't the issue in this game. Carolina gave him the ball and tried to let him go to work. Hell, at one point, they gave him the ball and basically decided it was going to be the NBA type of possession that we've seen plenty of times from the NBA level. We're going to all clear out and just let Caleb Wilson go to work. And for a guy that basically couldn't use his left hand, probably not a great idea. And he ends up taking a bad shot. Carolina, it ends up going the other way. Miami has a similar type of possession, but it ends up resulting in a bucket. And that's the thing that I think is frustrating if you're a Tar Heel fan, is that, yeah, the shot selection down the stretch was horrible. Really, the entire second half was just terrible. I mean, there's a reason you shot 9 for 34 in the second half, was because you were settling for way too many shots beyond the arc. And even some of the looks that they had inside the arc, it was nowhere near the level that you need them to be at. Carolina wasn't able to attack down on the block. They weren't able to get to the rim the way that they should have been able to. I thought one of the things that was really frustrating as well was, and I'd have to go back and watch it a second time and get a real good look as to whether Henry was being active enough to try to get the ball. They didn't give him the ball in the second half. I mean, in the first half, he was pretty much everywhere for Carolina. He was basically at times Carolina's entire offense. Throws up, 8 shots in that first half and then ends up finishing the game with just 12 shots, only 4 in the second half for him. I mean, he goes 1 for 4, but, one of those is from the outside that he had to settle for. That was that long 3 late in the game that, he was trying to hit just to give Carolina a chance to still have an opportunity to win the game. I mean, for me, I just don't understand that mindset. You got a guy that's playing well, one of your bigs that's playing well. You've got a guy that has an injured hand, and your thought is we're going to continually go to Caleb Wilson over and over again, not try to look to see if we can get Henry Vassar the ball. So that was definitely frustrating. But, I mean, in the second half in general, I mean, just nobody able to step up. Derek Dixon, 0 of 6 from the field. Seth Trimble, 0 of 4. Jaden Young, 0 of 2. So right there, Kyan Evans, 0 for 1. Carolina without a made basket from a guard outside of Jonathan Powell. If you could, whatever you consider Jonathan Powell, you could consider him a wing player with his size. I mean, the guards, yeah, you get one guard that hits a shot in the second half. Luka Bogovac didn't even hit a shot in the second half. That's not a recipe for success, especially when you have to settle for a lot of shots beyond the arc. The other thing that I thought was really, just not great from Carolina overall, and they didn't do a good job in the first half. They did a better job in the second half, but I think they could have done even better than they did in the second half. They didn't attack the way that they should have. Attack the basket, try to get, your guards to the rim. Really, credit to Miami. They did a good job of preventing Carolina from turning the corner a few times, but I didn't think it was nearly as big of a focus for Carolina as it should have been. I don't think that was really what the guys on the floor were looking for. And when you end up settling for those types of shots, it's going to lead to a very difficult play for Carolina, a very difficult half for Carolina. And that's exactly what you saw. So, I mean, yeah, it's got to be better down the stretch in these games. I think hopefully with a healthier Caleb Wilson than he was in this game, that will hopefully correct itself, because going to him is never the worst option in the world. But you got to stop going away from guys that are having success. We've seen it with Caleb at certain times this year. You saw it last night, I thought, with Henry Vassar. Carolina's got to be able to trust themselves to go to their bigs and not have to rely on a guard group that just isn't as talented as they've been in years past. That's the thing. They got to realize that they're not anywhere near as talented as some of the guard groups that Carolina's had. So, frustrating for sure, and a big part of the reason why they lost.
All right, the last thing we'll talk about from the game itself, then we'll get to our discussion topic and get out of here. The rebounding woes are as severe as I think they've been in my lifetime watching this program. This team, despite having a 7-footer in Vassar, a 6'10" guy in Caleb Wilson, and then even Jaron Stevenson, now that he's back as a starter with all that size. I mean, Carolina just simply gets bodied and moved and pushed around and worked on the glass in ways that they shouldn't. You're talking about, you got rebounded by 16 against Virginia. I think it was 12 the other night against Duke. This game, it's only 6, but they out rebounded you on the defensive glass. They out rebounded you on the offensive glass, and rebounding is the most important aspect of this game. It's putting the ball in the basket and rebounding the ball. And the best way to put the ball in the basket is to have the basketball. And we're talking about now a handful of games where there are stretches where Carolina quite simply doesn't rebound. I mean, you look at the missed box out on the free throw last night. That should have been a 1-point possession turns into 3 and makes a 3-point game a 6-point game at a critical juncture in the game. And it's just because Carolina not tough enough, whatever it is, to rebound the ball. And you had a stretch in the first half where Miami got 4 looks at the basket because Carolina, some of it was poor positioning, poor rebounding positioning, but a lot of it just comes down to energy, effort, and want to. Like, you can teach rebounding technique and where your position on the floor does matter. But a lot of it just comes down to, do you want the basketball or do you not? And for whatever reason, this team, despite all of its size and all of its length, they're not rebounding the ball the way that you want them to. They're not rebounding the ball the way that you expect them to. And you look at that combined with the turnovers was a big reason why they fell short. If the rebounding number looks different, if Carolina's +6 and they're +3 on the defensive glass and they're +3 on the offensive glass, guess what? Carolina wins the game. But that's not the case. And so, I think Hubert Davis, that's where the biggest frustration lied in. It's what you saw the timeout for. He actually left the huddle after he got done yelling at his guys. But, I thought after Duke, there would have been some sort of a response to, we're going to rebound the ball. We're going to get after the ball. And that did not happen. And look, they're a top 5 rebounding team statistically in the conference, or at least they were last night. But this is not a rebounding team that we're used to seeing from a team that has Carolina's size. I would have thought with a team that's as big and as long as Carolina is, they'd be the best rebounding team in the league, one of the best rebounding teams in the country. And quite simply, that's not the case.
I mean, that's why they went out and got the length that they did, was because they wanted to be a better rebounding team, wanted to be more physical on the inside than they were a year ago. And as I said earlier, we're starting to learn that some of the things that people pointed out about some of these guys coming into the season are true. I mean, especially with Henry Vassar, that he is a guy that gets pushed around at times. He is not necessarily a guy that handles physicality well. There are so many times where he just palms at balls and it doesn't end up going his way. And he repeatedly just keeps doing it. It doesn't make any sense. He is one of the more frustrating players that I think I've ever watched in a Carolina uniform try to rebound, because he's got the size. Everything else is there to his game, but he doesn't come away with important rebounds for Carolina. Jaren Stevenson at 6'10". In this game actually rebounds pretty well. There's been other games where he has done absolutely nothing on the glass, and that's been a big part of the issue for Carolina. You got a 6'10" guy on the floor that's not rebounding, that's not scoring for you. So what is he actually doing out there on the floor? Last night, not one of those games. 6 rebounds, tied for the team lead, had the most offensive rebounds, but there are moments where he does do that. And then Caleb Wilson, 6 rebounds in the game as well. But, I mean, then you look at some of the other guys. Zayden High has 5 off the bench in 7 minutes. That's the type of production that you're looking for. That's part of the reason why he was playing so much. I didn't think he should have been in as early as he was, but I did think that when he was in, he was a guy that was rebounding. Jonathan Powell, 5 defensive rebounds. That's an area that, you're hoping that you can be better in if you're Carolina. And they had 9 offensive rebounds in this game, but they only corralled 5 of them themselves. 4 of them were team rebounds, which means, if I'm remembering correctly from what you said, that means that they just went off the opponent out of bounds and Carolina got possession. You can't even come away with offensive rebounds. The most frustrating part about last night, though, was you were terrible at points in the first half rebounding. You were only down by 1 on the glass after the first half. It was 14-13. So even as bad as you looked, you had a chance to rectify that in the second half. What ended up happening? You get out-rebounded by 5. You allow 8 offensive rebounds in the second half, and they were able to succeed off of those second chance opportunities. They had 7 second chance points in the game. The final margin is 9, but that shows you that it could have been a much closer game if Carolina just finds a way to rebound and keep them off the offensive glass. That's something that Carolina's got to get better at here as we go throughout the remainder of conference play. Because, when you get into the NCAA tournament, if you have a team that is even remotely close to averaging 37 rebounds, because that's been about the magic number for Carolina, teams that average about 37 rebounds per game, which is solid, but not great. Those are the teams that really, from there up, can give Carolina a lot of problems on the glass. And if you run into a team that's similar to a Virginia or a Duke, then Carolina is going to be in big trouble. That's something that you have to find a way to be better. You went out and got the length. It's about just being bought in on that end of the floor, and at times it just doesn't feel like that's there for Carolina.
All right, let's get to our discussion topic, and then we'll shut down this edition of the podcast. Look, we have a reputation for whenever Carolina loses, usually there's going to be some emotion. There's going to be some vitriol that's exuding out of either one of us. It's more than usually I'm the one that's yelling and kicking and screaming, a lot like Hubert Davis is doing on the sidelines. Yet I don't find myself there with this loss. Disappointed and frustrated. This one, there were moments where, in the moment when Carolina didn't rebound, whatever, maybe said a few words I can't repeat, got a little angry. But, for the most part, this was like a loss that probably could have seen coming. If we're being honest with what this team has done so far this season away from Chapel Hill, which just kind of brings me to the biggest talking point. Like, where is our belief in this team as we get, closer and closer to Selection Sunday? We're 5 weeks away from getting the bracket. Barring something unforeseen, this team's going to the tournament. So we know their name is going to be called. We're not sweating this thing out like we were last year, where we were trying to map out the right kind of wins to get ourselves into the field. Carolina's going to make the field. But when you beat teams like Kansas, Kentucky, and Duke, you're the first program to do it since 2002. That was Maryland. Maryland that year won the national championship. It's the first time Carolina's done it since 1981, 1982. Carolina that year won the national championship. When you're beating those schools, there should be a belief that you are a national title threat, a contender, especially considering Duke and Kansas are that. Duke's a legitimate threat to go to the Final Four. Kansas, with or without Darren Peterson, they've proven they can beat anybody in the country. Kentucky's going to make the field, but a lot like Carolina could be done in the first weekend. Excuse me. But when you beat those programs should instill belief that you're a national title contender. Yet that's not where I find myself believing. That's not where I find myself. But I know that Roy Hibbert was saying that on CBS Sports Network the other night. And there was someone else, I think, on the Field 68 that was trying to talk Carolina up as a legitimate threat to make the Final Four. I don't find myself with those feelings. I don't find myself with that belief. Where like 2 years ago, I thought that team could go to a Final Four. I thought that team could win a national championship, and they didn't have the high-level wins that Carolina has so far this season against a premier program. So are you in the same boat as I am, where despite being 19-5 and being 5-5 in quad one, that you don't really believe this is a team that's going to make a deep and long tournament run come March?
Yeah, I don't see it. I will say right here, I guarantee you this team does not win a national championship. It's not happening. Like that thing about beating Kentucky, beating Kansas, and beating Duke all in the same year. Carolina, they're the first team since 2002 to do it, and they are going to be the team that does not win a national championship because They do not do the little things that they are supposed to do. You talk about that team 2 years ago. Why did you have so much belief in that team? Because that team rebounded its ass off. That team closed games strong. This team doesn't do either one of those things. And if you don't, then it's hard to believe in this team come March. This is a team that doesn't necessarily, you're a little worried by what you saw in this game that Carolina, just played against Miami also, because this team doesn't handle success all that well. What happens when you beat a team in the Sweet 16 that you're not expected to beat? Because that's probably going to be the scenario that you're going to run into. You're probably going to be a 4 seed, a 3 seed. There's a good chance that you're going to end up having to play a team that has a higher seed line than you. And so if that's the case and you beat them, are you going to be able to handle that quick turnaround of, hey, we just beat a really good team, now we got to turn around and do it again? I don't know if this team is there maturity-wise. And so for me, I look at it and I say that this is a team whose peak right now is an Elite Eight. I think that's probably as far as Carolina goes. I wanted to believe after Saturday that Carolina could make the Final Four. I think if things broke right, you felt like that was the case, but that was just reacting in the moment. If we're being realistic with ourselves, this team does not have the certain things that you have to have, the elements of those teams that we've seen make runs before for Carolina that we feel confident in. And so maybe they prove me wrong. Hopefully they do. But I'm going to tell you right now, you've got to be a lot better away from Chapel Hill before I'm going to believe that you can actually make that deep of a run in the NCAA tournament.
And look, I'll say this. If they make the Elite Eight, you could argue that they overachieved in a lot of ways with some of their deficiencies, with the way they don't turn people over. They're not an imposing defensive team. They don't overwhelm teams on the glass. And look, an Elite Eight season would be a really good season. Like you would answer a lot of the questions about your head coach. And that's still, not that I think that's really up in the air right now. I mean, Carolina's won 79% of their games so far this season. So I think he's quieted a lot of the noise around that. But I just feel like with some of the wins that you've earned, you should have a higher belief in what you're capable of doing. And right now that belief doesn't exist. That belief can change. Carolina can change that belief if they finish the regular season strong, if they go to a state and win. They get the home wins over Louisville. They get the home wins over Clemson. You go to Duke and maybe win a game in Cameron. That'll instill some belief. Because Carolina at home, national title, good. Carolina and Chapel Hill can play with any team in college basketball. Carolina away from Chapel Hill is nothing more than an above-average basketball team. And that's when they're playing at their best. When they're playing, like they were at Cal and Stanford, that's a borderline NCAA tournament team. So luckily they've stacked up a lot of wins at home that will look really good on a resume, and they've got themselves right now solidly in the field for the upcoming NCAA tournament. Because if this team was in the position it was a year ago, I don't know if we trust them to win the games on the road. They would have to win to make sure they heard their name called come Selection Sunday, which is, believe it or not, inside 5 weeks away from now. With that, folks, that is going to wrap up this edition of the show. In the meantime, we would direct you guys to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. We had you covered with the loss last night to Miami. That recap is available for you guys up on the website. You can go and check that out. We'll be getting you ready for the matchup with Pittsburgh later in the week as well. So be on the lookout for that coverage as we continue to take you through the basketball season. Same thing for the football side of things. It's the quiet time. It's the calm before the storm. But spring ball is right around the corner for Bill Belichick and his Tar Heels. We will be getting you ready for the start of spring practice and any other news and notes around the program. Anthony will have you covered. And all that coverage can and will be found at HeelToughBlog.com. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform, just search the Four Corners Podcast and will pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any audio editions of the show. If you're a video consumer, the best way to be notified when we go live, like the Facebook page at Heel Tough Blog, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Heel Tough Blog, or follow me on Twitter at HTB_Josh. The second we go live, you'll get a notification sent to your mobile device. You can jump in to be a part of our conversation talking Carolina basketball. But with that, folks, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for both watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.